Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. Okay, so today we are going to continue to talk on what that can cause poor IHC staining and what we can do about it. So we had already looked at inadequate antigen retrieval. We've also looked at poor fixation. Okay, so today I want us to look at inappropriate antibody concentration. Remember, when I gave us the background at the beginning, when I was talking about inadequate antigen retrieval, I gave you guys some protocol, okay? If you understood that, that will help you to understand what I'm going to say now, okay? So inadequate or inappropriate antibody concentration. Inadequate or inappropriate antibody concentration. Before we continue, my name is Dr. Emmanuel Obodo. I'm a biomedical scientist, and I'm also a lecturer in biomedical science here in the United Kingdom. So yeah, let's get into this, okay? So what do I mean by inappropriate antibody concentration? Remember, I told you guys when I was telling you guys in degree, okay? So if the antibody is, again, let me try to repeat that. Let's say it will require 5 degree, maybe that protocol require 5 degree of antigen for maybe 3 degree of antibody to detect it. What it means that even though the 5 degree is there, if the antibody is less than the required 3 degree that can detect it, let's say it is about maybe 1 degree, that may not be able to detect it. So because the recommended degree that can detect that 5 degree antigen is 3 degree antibody. So if you have 2 degree or 1 degree or 0 point something degree, it may find it difficult to detect that antigen. So that way it can lead to poor IHC staining. Okay, we're talking about inappropriate antibody concentration. So that's in terms of when the concentration of the antibody is under. But what about when the concentration of the antibody is over? That is why we use the word inappropriate. So now let's just stick with that. So 5 degree antigen require 3 degree antibody to detect it. Now we've mentioned when it is under, meaning if it is under, it cannot be able to detect it because there is no required amount of the antibody that can detect that antigen. Okay, now what if instead of 3 degree we have 5 degree of the antibody, or perhaps 4 degree of the antibody? Now what is going to happen? It's going to detect it because we have more than enough to detect the antigen. So what would then happen? Those excesses would then stem background. Okay, so it can give you no specific background staining. Why? Because there are excess antibody. So it's going to stain the antigen and of course bind the antigen, so of course bind all kinds of things because there is too much of it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what then happens is that when there is inappropriate amount of the antibody, that will lead to IHC poor staining. So because IHC has to do with the antibody detecting antigen. So if the antibody is not enough or it is too much, okay, than required, that could affect it. So inappropriate, antibody concentration can affect or lead to poor IHC staining. Does that make sense? Now, what then is going to be the solution? We've already seen again that, like we saw in poor fixation, we've already seen again that again it has to do with what is the amount of the antibody? Is it that it is under or is it that it is over? Obviously, when it is under, it's not able to bind the targeted antigen, okay? And of course, when it is over, it can bind the targeted antigen, but again, it can also give background binding, leading to what? Background staining. So what are we going to do to make sure that is not going to happen? Of course, there has to be a need to be able to do titration. Maybe use a recommended concentration of the antibody that is required. Or if you don't have it, you might need to optimize the concentration that need to be used by doing what? Titration. That titration will help you to find a diluted amount, okay? Of course, the titration can do maybe serial, dilution, and that can help you to detect, to see the amount that is required to be able to bind to that very antigen. I hope that makes sense, yeah? Because that amount is what I can give that specificity in binding. You don't want it to bind little, you don't want it in trying to bind more, start binding non-specific, okay? So that is why doing titration, serial dilution, or maybe using a recommended concentration is one of the ways we can be able to solve this problem, making sure that we use the adequate amount of the antibodies. I hope that makes sense. And again, it's also important in order to ensure whether your staining has done properly, in order to ensure that you have used the required amount of the antibody has been used, is also important that you use control. So one other way is to ensure that there is no inappropriate antibody concentration. One other way to ensure that IHC staining is not poor, one other way to detect the possibility of what have caused it, whether the IHC stain has stemmed properly or didn't stem properly. One of the things that you need to do is to use control. So when it comes to inappropriate antibody concentration, it's important that you make use of the control. It is that control, both the positive control and negative control, they are the ones that can help you to know how the IHC staining has been done, whether it is properly done or it has not been done. So that can help you to know whether you've used the required amount of the concentration of the antibody required or not. So these are the ways you can be able to correct poor IHC staining in a case of inappropriate or inadequate antibody concentration. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So inadequate antibody concentration is another factor that can lead to poor IHC staining. What are you going to do? You make sure that you do titration or use a recommended concentration of the antibody that can help you to detect that very antigen. Why are you doing that? You don't want to use small amount and you don't want to use more than the required amount, because the small amount will affect the antibody binding the antigen, and of course if it is too much, it will bind the antigen, then also bind non-specifically and give you background staining. And of course finally we can use control. So yeah, that's how you can be able to correct that if you suspect inappropriate antibody concentration. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. All right, thank you very much for listening. Please, can I ask you to comment, like, okay, subscribe and share to friends and family and everyone that you know that this video can benefit. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best till I come back your way again. Bye bye.